there were big elections in Russia. Big elections, and Vladimir Putin. Can we look at the Russian election results? Actually, you know what? We can just go to my Twitter. I think I posted part of it while the vote was still young. Here are the election results. 87.85%. Now this is 26% reporting, but I don't think you'd be surprised to learn that the vote total did not change too much, or at least the percentages did not change too much after this. So I bet on 86% in the day before, as you can see here. I bet it was going to be 86. I was wrong. It was 87. But I will say that if we were playing horseshoes, I would have won. I would have at least gotten a point for that, because I was pretty close. I was pretty close on this guess. But yes, the plucky outsider, the anti-establishment candidate, the anti-corruption behemoth, the I would say the the anarchist option. No, this clown is getting another term in office. He has solidified that control. The control is tight. This was all a performance, and you can almost predict it down to the T on how the performance was going to go, which is why 86, which would be a ridiculous prediction, and any other type of competitive democracy is considered, a believable option. And they even went further. But I want to see some reports about the Russian election, and then we're going to talk about some of the activities that happened around the Russian election. We have more Molotov cocktail attacks, and I want to talk about how the election was run in occupied territory. So first, let's start with this report from Steve Rosenberg as he reports on the results of the Russian election.
For Vladimir Putin, 6 more years in the Kremlin. Russia's president is sounding more confident than ever.
Whoever might want to intimidate us, whoever might want to suppress us, our will and our conscience, they have never been able to do it and never will.
Then, Mr. Putin's first public comments on the death of jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny.
You may be surprised, but a few days before Mr. Navalny died, some colleagues of mine told me there was an idea to exchange him.
Now, this is something that's a rumor that's been spinning, the idea that the Russians were negotiating to release a prisoner, release Navalny in exchange for a different prisoner. I do want to put out there, though, putting aside that news story, this is the first time Putin has ever said Navalny's name. This right here. This is the first time in over 20 years and being in the position that he's in, going on 30, first time he said Navalny's name after he's dead and could no longer pose a threat to him, at least a living threat.
For certain people in prison in the West, you can believe it or not, I said, I agree, even before he'd finished talking. But what happened, happened.
Election results on Russian TV, not a hold-your-breath moment. The winner, by 1.5 miles, Vladimir Putin. What an incredible level of support and unity around the figure of Putin, he says, and a powerful signal to the West. But in this race, Vladimir Putin was, from the start, unbeatable. There were other candidates, but no serious challenger. Potential rivals here are swiftly removed from the political stage.
Yeah, there was at least one semi-anti-war candidate. People debate whether how serious or how devoted he really was. He used to be part of the Communist Party of Russia, who was throwing his hat in the ring, but he was kept off the ballot. He was kept off the ballot after there was semi-surprising turnout to actually get enough signatures to get him off the ballot, but he was kept off the ballot. Whether because they didn't like him highlighting the failure of the war, they didn't like his critiques, they didn't like any show of disunity, they kept him off the ballot. They only kept candidates on the ballot that were willing to, kiss the ring.
Forced into exile or put in jail. And elections tightly controlled by the Kremlin. But if they couldn't win, Mr. Putin's opponents could at least protest.
So what he's about to highlight is something that's been getting a lot of chagrin from Ukrainians, because they're like, come on. This is the best you can do. This is called the noon for Putin, or like noon protest. So what it was is supposed to be at noon in Russia. At that specific time, voters are supposed to come out and stand in line to show disapproval with Vladimir Putin. This is a way to protest semi-discreetly and a way to show dissatisfaction while also tying the hand of the authorities to crack down on them. What are you going to do? Arrest them for voting? They'll arrest them for standing in line. Now, Ukrainians have responded to this by saying, so you're going to help Putin by increasing voter turnout or making the lines longer? And how much of an impact is this really going to have? We're sick of symbolic acts of, resistance. Start to engage in real acts of resistance. Someone might say, hey, we want you to more to do stuff like this woman did. Where was this in St. Petersburg, attacking an election office with a Molotov cocktail. Now, this woman does not succeed. She throws the Molotov, it bounces, and then she tries again, and, well, it did not work. But this was just one example. There were multiple fire attacks on election offices. I know there was at least one on the recruitment center. I knew that there was somebody who burnt down the inside of a voting station. There was ink attacks, like green ink being dumped on the ballots. But that is something where Ukrainians are like, this is literally nothing. And even the green ink, they weren't a big fan of. And so it seems for the Ukrainian perspective, it's like, this is really cute or whatever. But again, there's a war happening. It's a brutal war, and we want that resistance to be more intense. I do think there is, of course, a defense of you can get serious prison time of like a decade to more for resisting against Vladimir Putin, especially if you're actually trying to fight them and stuff. You can get killed, you can get tortured. The Russian prison system will not treat you gently. And so I think these are the reasons why these people might be hesitant to try to resist in other ways. Not to mention, of course, getting people to do something that many people would consider, quote unquote, turning against their countrymen is also I don't know if I want to use the word psychologically difficult.
And they did, in many parts of Russia. Opposition figures had called on Russians to flood polling stations at midday to vote against Putin or spoil their ballots, a symbolic protest against the system. We were here. I've never seen queues like this before at a Russian polling station. Before his death in prison, Alexei Navalny had backed the protest. It took courage to come. The authorities had warned that large crowds at noon would be viewed as illegal gatherings.
I was here as a member.
Ivan, not his real name, told me why he'd come.
It was important for me to see faces of other people who would come here today and to see that I'm not alone in my political views, and that there are a lot of Muscovites and other people who believe that Russia can be another country with another future.
For now, there'll be no change in the Kremlin.
This election was never about would Vladimir Putin win or wouldn't he. Elections here are designed to ensure he wins, and wins big. From the outset, for the Kremlin, this vote was about creating the impression that Mr. Putin has a mandate from his people, not only for war in Ukraine, but also for what he's doing at home, transforming Russia into an increasingly militaristic society in confrontation with the West.
But across town, Muscovites continued to pay tribute to Alexei Navalny, the man who'd wanted to be Russia's president. Here, a ballot paper, in place of Putin's name, Navalny's. And this message: he's the candidate we wanted. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
So this is one report from Steve Rosenberg, but there was a second report he released soon after, which covered a speech that Putin made afterwards. Now, something that's interesting about the speech is Putin goes out and he has all of the other candidates that ran against him while also kissing his ring come out with him to all sing and dance and be like, yeah, 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 we're all united. If you were at all questioning of whether these other candidates were real alternatives, well, I think them immediately coming out on the stage, kissing the ring and dancing for Putin might be one indicator.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin!
After the landslide came the love. Vladimir Putin, portrayed by the Kremlin as a national hero.
Дорогие друзья,
at a concert marking 10 years since Russia annexed Crimea.
Да здравствует Россия!
Long live Russia, he cried. Cue the national anthem. And some Kremlin choreography to make it look as if Putin is Russia and Russia is Putin. Earlier, we saw the crowds pouring towards Red Square. Thousands of Russians had been given free tickets for the Putin event. After all, a president who claims to have won 87% of the vote needs a decent audience.
Western leaders have dismissed Russia's presidential vote as neither free nor fair, a stage-managed election. But the Kremlin couldn't care less what the West thinks. It paints a picture of a president who enjoys the overwhelming support of his people.
Down at the Russian Election Commission, they'd counted all the votes and they presented all their figures. So, it's...
By the way, one of the things they do in Russia is they give people time off of work to go to Putin rallies. Could you imagine you're at like, hey, there's a Biden rally in DC today. You can take the day off on the condition that you go to the Biden rally in DC and carry this little Biden flag and wave it around.
6 more years of President Putin. But what does that mean for Russia and for the world?
It doesn't mean anything good for Russia, for Ukraine, for the world, because Putin will continue this permanent war. Putin will continue to suppress civil society inside his country, and in that sense he becomes a full-blooded autocrat, dictator.
And yet, the direction of travel for Russia under Vladimir Putin is already clear. More confrontation abroad and repression at home. Few here seem to believe that this election will bring a significant change. If it's the same president, Katya says, then I don't think anything will be different. In a country that's been ruled by the same man for a quarter of a century, Russians are starting to forget what change looks like. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Man, I like Steve Rosenberg, one of the few good journalists still in Moscow. Now, I want to say that it wasn't just in what is formerly recognized as territory of Russia where these elections were happening. Well, elections, quote unquote, were happening. 87%. Come on. I wanted to also show you that there were also elections, quote unquote, happening in occupied Ukrainian territory. And how it would work is that there would be a Russian collaborator, either somebody working locally or somebody brought in from Moscow, St. Petersburg, that would go around with this little notebook while flanked by multiple Russian soldiers carrying AK-74s, AK-47, grenades, pistols, full masks, sometimes balaclava, helmet, completely geared up, sometimes 2 of them, sometimes 4 of them. And they come up to you and they say, hello, Mr. Citizen of the Russian Federation, here in Metsiopol, here in Mariupol, here in Avdiivka, in Bakhmut, and wherever. Well, Avdiivka and Bakhmut, there's not many voters there. But here in this area, you are here to vote. And we are here to either bring you down to the voting station so you can vote, or so you can fill out the form right now. And then they hand you the form, and then they look you in the face. And it's not just you that looks you in the face, it's the soldiers with the guns that look you in the face. And then, your move. Do you tell them, fuck off, Russian soldiers that are notorious for torturing civilians, with UN reports saying that more than 90% of the civilians and POWs that go through your custody are mistreated, that torture is systemic, while you have your filtration camps operating, and President Vladimir Putin signed an executive order to take the property rights from anybody who doesn't accept Russian citizenship in occupied territory? Screw you. Well, that could lead to abuse, torture, who knows what sorts of things. That's certainly going to be on the mind of the person talking to them. They could try to just say, I don't know, but that could breed suspicion as well. Or do they just silently take the paper, fill out whatever, and be done with it? And if they are going to fill out the paper, would they be ballsy enough to write in anything else outside of Vladimir Putin? You do not go around and get people to vote with machine guns. Just putting that out there. I think that if Biden had people from the DNC coming door to door, getting people with machine guns to come out to vote with him, I think that it would be a national news story for a good reason. Moscow has launched a wide-ranging campaign telling residents of occupied parts of Ukraine to vote in the Russian presidential elections. For the first time, the national vote is taking place over 3 days, the 15th to the 17th, but additional early voting has already begun in occupied parts of 4 Ukrainian regions: Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Luhansk. One resident complained of pro-Russian collaborators with ballot boxes going from house to house, looking for voters accompanied by armed soldiers. Vladimir Putin will certainly win another term in office, but a high turnout would help the Kremlin's effort to legitimize his continued rule. It would also justify Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Voting normally starts early in remote parts of Russia, but the procedure has been extended to 4 partially occupied regions of Ukraine for quote-unquote security reasons. There are a variety of ways in which Ukrainians under occupation are coerced into voting. Even though occupation authorities have set up polling stations, voters are not required to visit them, as those same authorities have dispatched people with ballot boxes to their houses. Dear voters, we worry about your safety. Do not have to go anywhere to vote. We will come to your house with ballots and boxes, the Russian-installed electoral commission in the Zaporizhia region said on social media. Ukrainians under occupation are also put under pressure through a pro-vote campaign called Inform UIK, ostensibly designed to inform them about the procedure of voting as well as all the candidates. It seeks to visit all remaining residents of Russian-occupied regions at home, and its representatives are often accompanied by armed men. This is not only an intention, I think, to intimidate the local population, but it's also an attempt to solidify their control by showing the arm of the state, of the authority in these local villages, going to everybody, checking who's home, getting an idea of who's home, getting an idea of who does not receive them warmly. They collect personal data to compile lists of voters, and sometimes film local residents during such visits. Russia's electoral chief in the partially occupied Zaporizhia region acknowledged that locals were worried about the filming. Ukrainians have come under considerable pressure to take Russian passports, but Ukrainian passports are being accepted as proof of ID to make voting easier. But that's under the understanding that by June or July, if they haven't accepted Russian passports, they can literally be deported. Residents have been sent text messages informing them of the dates of the vote, and tried and tested Soviet methods are also being deployed to attract them to polling stations, such as free concerts and food. So they're doing the Yanukovych model. Here's a bag of grain, vote for me. Okay, well, anyway, I just wanted to show that element of the election, that is Russian politics and occupied territory. Here's a bag of wheat, vote for Putin. Don't like the bag of wheat? Here's a gun. You're voting for Putin.